4 true stories of military horror. They still march after midnight in Fort Bragg. Story 1, submitted by Marcus D. from Fayetteville, North Carolina. I served at Fort Bragg for 6 years. Out of everything I saw, deployments, firefights, and the wreckage of men who never quite came back, nothing ever got under my skin like the nights on Range 19. They used that range for nighttime exercises, but most of the time it was quiet, empty, fenced off with rusted wire and faded "Live Fire" signs. Around 2017, my unit was tasked with cleaning up the range before a big joint exercise. It was supposed to be routine: haul out old shell casings, check for duds, mark the terrain. I drew night watch duty for 3 nights straight. On the first night, I parked the Humvee by the range tower. The air was damp, and the pine trees leaned in like they were eavesdropping. The whole base was a shadow of itself after dark, quiet except for distant artillery and the hiss of generators. Around Oro 200, I started hearing footsteps in the brush. Not animals, rhythmic, heavy, like boots hitting dirt in formation. I thought maybe another squad was out doing night drills. I radioed to confirm. "Range control, this is Bravo 2-1. I got movement east of the tower. You got eyes on anyone training out here?" Static, then a slow clipped response. "Negative, Bravo 2-1. Range is cold. All training concluded 1900 hours." That was it. But the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, steadier, until I could hear the faint jingle of gear, the metal-on-metal sound that only comes from loaded webbing and dog tags. Then a voice. "Fall in." It was soft, but it hit me like a gunshot. My scalp prickled. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. Just trees. I killed the light and listened. The steps moved past the Humvee, maybe 20 feet away, like a whole squad marching in the dark, invisible but perfectly in step. I could even hear the faint breath of men exhaling together. Then silence. I reported it to my CO the next morning. He laughed, said fatigue plays tricks on you, but the other guys started whispering about it. Everyone who pulled guard at Range 19 said the same thing. Footsteps, voices, sometimes even the sound of rifles being shouldered. On the second night, I brought my buddy Ramirez. We decided we'd settle it, prove it was just echo or bass noises. Around 01:30, we were sitting on the tailgate drinking burnt coffee when we heard the cadence again. Left, right, left. The rhythm came from beyond the tree line. Ramirez looked at me and mouthed, "You hear that?" We followed the sound about 50 yards in, moving slow. Then we saw them. At first I thought my eyes were adjusting wrong. Shapes between the trees, darker than the dark. A line of figures in old fatigues, helmets low, rifles slung. They marched right past us, maybe 10 of them, faces blurred like fog. The air around them was colder, like a draft from an open freezer. Ramirez froze. I could hear him breathing hard. Then one turned its head toward us. No eyes, just hollow pits. Its mouth moved like it was trying to form a word. Then the whole column flickered, like bad film, and vanished. We ran. Neither of us said anything until we got back to the Humvee. Ramirez refused to stand watch again. He put in for transfer a month later. I told myself it had to be stress, some trick of light and memory, but the strangest part came weeks later. I was reviewing old base records for a historical project, just paperwork duty before deployment, and I found an entry from 1943. A unit had gone missing on that same range during a night exercise. 10 men. They were marching through a fog when a live fire accident detonated nearby. Only fragments were recovered. The report said their patrol call sign was Midnight Company. Every year after that, soldiers stationed at Bragg claimed to hear marching after midnight. The Army stopped using Range 19 after too many complaints. Last year I visited Bragg again, it's Fort Liberty now renamed, and drove past the old training fields. Everything looked the same: the pines, the dirt roads, the sagging fence line. Out of habit, I rolled down the window. Somewhere far off in the trees, I heard it again. Boots. Marching in time, and a voice low and steady, drifting through the dark. Fall in. I didn't look back. They're still out there, still marching. Story 2, submitted by Kelly R. from Killeen, Texas. I wasn't supposed to be stationed at Fort Bragg for more than a few weeks. I was Air Force, on a temporary detail for communications support. The Army guys called us visiting aliens. They weren't wrong. The base had its own strange atmosphere. Like everything there lived under tension even when the day was calm. The story I'm about to tell didn't happen in combat. It happened in a barracks room that should have been empty. They gave me a second-floor bunk in one of the older admin buildings near the training airfield. The halls were long, painted the color of wet concrete, and the windows didn't open anymore. My first night there, I noticed something off. The door across from mine was locked, but light spilled from underneath it. I figured it was just storage or some officer's office. Around 2300, I went to take a shower. When I came back, the door was wide open. Inside, there was a perfectly made bunk, crisp sheets, and a framed photo of a soldier in old camouflage, the woodland pattern they stopped issuing years ago. He looked maybe 25, clean cut, smiling. His name tag read, Campbell. I thought someone must be rehabbing the room for a new arrival, so I shut the door. But later that night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard boots pacing just outside my own door. Heel toe, heel toe. I looked through the peephole. Nobody. Still, the sound went on for minutes, back and forth, like someone guarding the hallway. I told the duty sergeant the next morning. He looked up from his paperwork and said, "You're in 214, right? You didn't mess with the door across from you?" "No," I lied. He sighed. "That room belonged to Sergeant Campbell. Died in '05, training jump accident. Parachute never opened." I waited for him to smirk, to tell me it was a joke. He didn't. He just said, "They keep it locked because his folks come by every year. They like to see it untouched." That night I taped a towel under my door. Childish maybe, but I didn't want to see that light again. Still, I woke up around 0300 to the sound of boots. Not pacing this time. Marching. Dozens of them pounding the floor from somewhere below, like a full unit drilling in the middle of the night. I went to the stairwell and looked down. The first floor was pitch dark, but the sound was so close it felt like it was right underneath my feet. I crouched, pressed my ear to the concrete. You know what I heard? Voices, faint but distinct. Orders being called. Forward march. Halt. Eyes front. Then silence. The next morning my window was open. Remember how I said they didn't open? The latch was rusted solid, yet it was pushed halfway up, and the air in the room smelled like burned parachute nylon, that sickly synthetic scent you never forget once you've been near a jump accident. I requested a room transfer. They gave me one, no questions asked. My new neighbor was an old MP named Harris who'd been on base forever. Over chow one night, he said, "You were in Campbell's Hall, right?" I nodded. "Don't take this the wrong way," he said, "but if you heard marching, you weren't the first. Used to be jump school dorms, way back. Before they expanded, they'd run drills at all hours. Some guys didn't come back from those jumps, but their names are still on the rosters. It's like they never signed out." He smiled, but his eyes didn't. On my last night before leaving Bragg, I walked past that hallway one more time. The door to Campbell's room was closed again. But someone had slid something underneath it. An old army patch, airborne wings faded with age. I knelt to pick it up, but stopped halfway. Because from the other side of that locked door, someone whispered, "Ready to jump, sir." And then, in the brief silence after, I heard the unmistakable creak of boots stepping up onto metal flooring. The kind you'd find on the back ramp of a C-130. I left it there. That patch is probably still lying in the hall. A small piece of cloth waiting for a man who never landed. Story 3, submitted by Daniel P. from Columbus, Ohio. I wasn't a soldier, at least not anymore. By the time I ended up at Fort Bragg, I was working as a civilian contractor for a logistics company that serviced military transport convoys. My job was boring. Inventory, fuel reports, chain of custody documents. I took the position because it paid well and got me out of Ohio for a while. But if I'd known what waited at the edge of that base, I'd have stayed home. It started with the trucks. Convoy runs went out at all hours. Most of our drivers left before dawn, when the sky was just starting to gray. But sometimes, equipment moved at night. Unmarked containers, no manifests, no questions. We were told to keep the paperwork clean and the radios silent. One night in early November, I was assigned to log a return route from a convoy that had left 2 nights earlier. Except they never officially returned. The next morning I found one of the trucks parked behind our depot, lights still on, engine idling low. The driver, a corporal I'd met once or twice named Lafferty, wasn't inside. His radio handset was dangling, crackling with static. I called it in, thinking he'd gone to the restroom or grabbed breakfast. But no one had seen him since the convoy left. Security sealed off the area. They found his logbook on the passenger seat. The last entry was short. 4:07 hours, lights in the woods, men on the road, not ours. That's it. They towed the truck for inspection, but that night the same thing happened again. A different vehicle, same spot, no driver. This one had its headlights angled toward the tree line, and the ground in front of it was full of prints. Heavy boot treads, dozens of them, leading into the forest. Only one set came back out. After that, they stopped sending convoys down that route. But curiosity's a hard thing to suppress. I'd heard rumors about the training forest out there, how old ordnance still sat buried under the roots, how sometimes the ground shifted like it was breathing. So, naturally, I went to see for myself. It was a Friday evening just before sunset. I parked my Jeep near the service road and followed the tire ruts into the pines. The woods were quiet. Too quiet for a place full of birds and insects. The deeper I went, the thicker the fog became, curling around my legs like smoke. Then I heard it, the sound of a diesel engine idling somewhere ahead. Through the mist, I saw the outline of a truck. Military green, no markings. A figure stood beside it, uniformed, helmeted, unmoving. I raised a hand. "Hey, you okay out here?" The figure turned. Even from 20 feet away, I could see there was something wrong with its face, like it had been erased, just a smooth blur where features should have been. And behind it, the other trucks came into view, one by one, engines humming softly, lined up in the fog like ghosts waiting for orders. The faceless soldier stepped forward. Its boots didn't make a sound. When it raised its hand to salute, the others followed in perfect unison. Rows of them, fading in and out of the mist, all dressed in mismatched fatigues from different decades. I ran. When I stumbled back to the Jeep, my radio was on, even though I'd turned it off. A voice, male, distorted, came through. Convoy complete, awaiting command. Then silence. The next morning I tried to tell my supervisor. He looked tired, like he'd heard this before. "You shouldn't have gone out there," he said. "That forest? They used it during the 1940s for field tests. Men disappeared out there. Units that never checked back in. The Army built new roads just to avoid the site." He leaned closer. "They say the convoys still come through sometimes, from somewhere else. From then. I quit the following week. Drove straight back to Ohio, every now and then around 4 a.m. I'll wake to the sound of engines idling outside my apartment. Heavy diesel, muffled, but close. When I look through the blinds, there's never anything there. But once, I caught a glimpse of light reflecting off metal, just for a second. Headlights, maybe. Or the gleam of a convoy that never finished its route. Story 4. Submitted by Teresa M. from Charleston, South Carolina. My husband, Eric, was stationed at Fort Bragg back in 2010. I moved there after we got married, a base wife, trying to make a home out of an apartment that shook every time artillery practice began. Most of my days were quiet. The nights weren't. We lived off post in a small complex near Yadkin Road. From our balcony, we could see the glow of the training fields in the distance. Every night around midnight, faint lights flickered across the tree line, like flashlights bobbing in rhythm. I used to joke they were ghost soldiers doing PT. Eric didn't laugh. He said the guys called it the Midnight March. The first time I actually saw them, it was the week before Christmas. Eric had pulled a 36-hour shift and finally crashed on the couch. I was out on the balcony smoking, the kind of nervous habit you pick up when you're married to someone who jumps out of planes for a living. The night was cold, wet, and perfectly still. Then, from somewhere beyond the fence line, I heard it. Boots, marching in unison. Not close, just far enough that it sounded like a heartbeat. I leaned over the railing and saw a line of dim lights moving along the tree line. 10, maybe 12. The rhythm was steady, too perfect to be drunks or kids. Then one of the lights broke off from the rest and started moving toward our complex. I told myself it was a soldier on patrol. But as it drew nearer, I realized I couldn't see who was holding it. Just the glow, drifting between the trees, silent. I whispered Eric's name, but he was out cold. I backed into the apartment, shut the balcony door, and watched through the glass. The light came all the way to the fence, then stopped. It flickered twice like someone signaling, and went out. The next morning, there were boot prints in the mud under our balcony. A week later, Eric started having nightmares. He'd wake up gasping, shouting cadence like he was still in training. One night, he sat straight up in bed, eyes wide open, and said, "They're coming through now." When I asked who, he just whispered, "The ones who never stopped." He wouldn't talk about it after that. But every few nights he'd wake before midnight, stand at the window, and stare out toward the tree line. Once, I heard him mutter, "It's not a march anymore. It's a search." Then came the night he didn't wake up. It was around 12:45 a.m. I'd fallen asleep on the couch. The sound of boots woke me, that same measured rhythm, closer this time, echoing through the parking lot. I sat up and saw light sweeping across the blinds, like someone with a lantern was outside. When I peeked through the gap, I froze. A group of soldiers stood in the street. Their uniforms were wrong, faded green, Vietnam-era cuts. Their helmets were dented and their faces were pale, waxy, like old photographs. They stood perfectly still, rifles slung, eyes fixed on our building. Then slowly one raised his hand and pointed to our balcony. I turned to wake Eric, but the couch was empty. The front door was wide open. I ran outside barefoot, screaming his name. The street was empty, no soldiers, no lights. Just tire tracks in the dirt leading toward the woods behind the complex. MPs searched for 3 days. They found his dog tags near the fence, nothing else. The official report said AWOL. I know better. 3 months later, I moved back to South Carolina. Every year on December 19th, the night he vanished, I wake to the sound of boots outside my window. I tell myself it's memory, imagination, grief playing its cruel tricks. But last year, for the first time, I opened the curtains. There were footprints in the frost on my lawn, a straight line leading from the street to my front steps. And pressed into the glass of my window, clear as a handprint, was a palm wearing a paratrooper's glove.